questions in the Q&A. And thank you, Greg, for starting the recording. All right, I'm passing it off to Greg.
Awesome. Thank you, Tessie. Can everyone hear me okay? Good. Tessie, I'll let you give me a thumbs up that you can hear. All right, awesome. Beautiful. Thanks, Connie. Great to see everyone on here. Thank you all for joining. Have an exciting presentation to go through. Hopefully everyone can walk away with a better understanding of bone health, which is the goal today. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our presentation here, and we will get going. Okay, Tessie, are those slides showing up on your end? People give me a thumbs up or raise your hand if you're seeing those. Everything look good?
See the slides.
Okay, awesome. So today's presentation is titled How Bone Health is the Key to Healthy Aging and Longevity. So let's go ahead and get started with this. Let me just change my view here a little bit, make this a little easier to see. Okay. Perfect. So the agenda for today is, first, we're going to look at the billion-dollar bone health problem. And that's going to be split into two parts. So part one is going to be bone health as it regards to aging, and then why exercise, traditional exercise, isn't the answer that most of us are looking for. And then part three, we're going to talk about a better way to strengthen bones. And I know many of you are brand new to what we do at OsteoStrong. Some of you have been coming for a long time. Regardless of where you're at in your journey, this webinar is meant to be educational. And so whether you've been doing OsteoStrong for 3 or 4 years, I think you'll learn a lot about bone health through this. Or if you're brand new and just exploring how can I take better care of my bones and what does the research show, I think this will also be very good for you as well. And then of course we'll save some time at the end to answer any questions that you may have. So my name's Greg Preston. OsteoStrong's a franchise. That's a picture of my wife and I on the left. We're local franchise owners here in Denver. So we have a facility in Lakewood and then another facility down in Greenwood Village, Denver Tech Center area. And then we have a 1-year-old son named Harrison. That was us eating barbecue this week. So, we are very fortunate to have a healthy young boy and to be part of the community here in Denver to try to help people with their health. So to kick things off, I've done this in the past, is I'm a father now, so I got to start things off with a bad dad joke of the day. And so the question is, why did the skeleton take acting classes? So if you have a guess, feel free to just, pop that in the chat. Don't think too hard. This is a dad joke meant to be pretty bad. He wanted to be a star. Womp, womp, womp. I know, right? So there you go. If nothing else, you get a bad dad joke out of this. So, okay. So let's get into some of the facts about bone health. So why is this such an important topic these days? Well, one, if we just look in this country alone, 44 million Americans are at risk for low bone density and osteoporosis. And that equals $17 billion, a billion with a B, in medical costs each year. And if you're not aware, 50% of women, 1 out of every 2 women, will be affected by osteoporosis in their lifetime. And for men, it's 25%. So 1 out of every 4 men. So this affects men as well. People, when you have osteoporosis, you're obviously at greater risk of a hip fracture. And the statistics on hip fractures are very alarming and should be very concerning. So just a couple up there: 20%, 1 out of 5 people who break a hip die within a year from complications. And then 50% are disabled for life. And so that's what we want to, that's not meant to scare you. That's just meant to just tell you what the facts are, and then we can talk about, okay, well, what can we do about this? So first, let's understand why this happens. So bone and muscle tissue has a normal life cycle with aging. And so this graph is a good representation of that. So what this shows is on the bottom axis of the graph is age in years. So moving left to right is as someone gets older. And then on the vertical axis is someone's bone and muscle tissue. So you'll notice there's a really sharp incline when we're young. You know, when we're going through our teenage years, growing up, our bone and muscle mass is increasing each and every year. Most of us peak around age 30, at which point it starts to slowly decline for the rest of life. And what actually happens is our bone density starts to decline first. But one key thing to understand is our muscles are attached to our bone. And so our body will never allow muscle tissue to be stronger than the bone tissue that it's attached to. So if our bone starts to naturally weaken after age 30, you can guess what happens to your muscle tissue, right? The body forces the muscle to atrophy and get weaker with age as well. And so this natural process is actually the main reason that people continue to get weaker as they age, even if they're remaining active and eating healthy and doing all the things to take care of themselves. And so it's not an ideal equation that we want to face, but that's why, you know, someone who's 60 years old, even if they're putting in a lot of effort to take care of themselves, it's going to be really hard for them to do the things they were doing at 40 if they have a weakened foundation underneath. So that's part one of really defining the problem. And as we start to look at some of the terminology in this space, everyone's for the most part is familiar with osteoporosis. But if you're not familiar with that word, what it actually means is osteo means bone, porosis means porous. So our bone is supposed to be like a dense sponge that can flex and bend and absorb a lot of force and be really strong. But as our bone weakens and loses mass, it can become very porous. And so we don't want to have overly porous bone. And now when you go to your doctor and you get a bone density scan, they're going to put you in a category, and that category is based off of what is called a T-score. And a T-score compares your bone density to average 30-year-old bone density. So remember, our bone peaks around age 30. And so that is what everything is compared to later, is where were we compared to where people normally peak at 30. And so you can be in one of three categories. You can be in the normal range, the low bone density range, which is also called osteopenia, which is that yellow band, or you can be in the red band, which is osteoporosis. So what is actually going on in our body that causes bone to weaken and or get stronger? How does bone actually change? Well, the first thing we have to acknowledge is that just like every other tissue and organ in the body, bone is a living tissue, meaning it's constantly remodeling throughout our lives. And there's two primary types of cells responsible for this. The first type are called osteoblasts. These are your bone building cells. So you can think of this like a construction crew, literally for building new bone. These are often thought of the cells that we want to keep very active throughout our lives. So we're constantly building lots of new bone, new healthy bone tissue. On the flip side, bone tissue has a life cycle, and we don't want old bone sticking around too long. And so that's what these osteoclasts are for. Sometimes people refer to them as janitors or the cleanup crew or the demolition team, but these are the cells removing the old bone. So you have a building team and you have a demolition team, and both are important. The osteoclasts also help make some of the mineral that's stored in bone available for other processes in the body. But so both of these are important. I don't want you to think as one is good guys and one is bad guys. However, what really determines whether our bone is getting stronger or weaker is the relationship between these activities. So when we're young, we're building lots of new bone. So the cells on the left-hand side of the screen are very, very active, but those slow down past the age of 30. And so if we're now removing more bone than what we're replacing, that's where over time we can lose bone mass. So you can think of it kind of like a teeter-totter, and we want, at a minimum, we want these activities to be balanced. But if we're trying to increase our bone strength and our bone density, we actually need to upregulate the building activity so it outpaces the removal activity. Feel free to type in the chat as we're going through this, and we'll definitely answer questions at the end. So you can take notes in there, you can ask questions, let me know if things are making sense. And so let's look at the effects of bone health with age. And as we lose bone, what actually happens to the body? So the obvious one is the first one, right? Like we lose bone density. So if our bone's getting weaker, obviously our bone density is getting reducing. But as we already discussed, our muscle tissue is also attached to the bone. And so that can actually cause our muscle to weaken as well. So that's why people, as they lose bone density, they lose muscle strength. And then once you've lost bone and muscle tissue and muscle strength, that is going to cause a decrease in balance and posture. Think of your body like if you were a building and now the foundation has gotten weakened, and then the other infrastructure is weakened. It's not going to have as good of balance, not going to have as good of posture. So those are symptoms of losing bone mass. And then oftentimes that's going to put more pressure on your joints. Joints, the joint mobility won't be as good, and that's going to cause more joint and back pain. This actually can cause increase in blood glucose levels as well, which is what they measure to determine if someone is at a pre-diabetic level or type 2 diabetic. And that really relates to the amount of muscle tissue that someone has. And then obviously, this is a big one. As these things happen, as you get weaker, as your balance decreases, all of those things add up to an increased risk of fall or injury and potentially fracture. So these are the consequences of this process. But we're gonna, and again, remember, right now we're just focusing on defining the problem. I promise by the end of this, this is not all doom and gloom. There are definitely things within all of our control we can do to intervene in this process. So part one of the problem. I just want everyone to understand what's actually happening with the human body with age. So hopefully you have a good feel for that now. And then the second part is, probably the most common piece of advice given to address this is just do weight-bearing exercise. And that is good advice in some regard, but not good advice in other situations. So I want to just provide some clarity around that piece and discuss why normal forms of exercise aren't necessarily enough when we're talking about preventing bone loss and strengthening bone. So the first thing we need to understand is when we're trying to strengthen bone, bone works just like any other system in the body. It requires physical stress on that system in order to get our body to naturally adapt. So you can think of this like if you're trying to, let's forget about bone health for a second. Let's look at the cardiovascular system, right? If we're trying to strengthen our cardiovascular system, what do? We go do cardiovascular exercise, right? We run, we bike, we swim, we do a rower, whatever it might be. There's tons and tons of forms of ways to stress your cardiovascular system and thus strengthen that system so that it operates better and performs better. Same thing with muscle tissue. We know how to physically stress muscle through weightlifting, resistance training, all sorts of types of ways to stress muscle tissue to get that tissue to adapt. And bone works much the same way. We just have to stress it in the right way. And the natural response that we're actually trying to create in the body is called osteogenesis. The word osteogenesis simply means formation of new bone, which is turning on and activating those bone building cells that we talked about. those osteoblast cells so that we're building bone. So that's the goal. If we're trying to strengthen bone, we have to trigger these osteoblast cells. And so that's what we were talking about here. So if we can upregulate those osteoblast cells there on the left, and keep them elevated over long periods of time, then our bone can continue to build and become stronger. So the question is, what actually creates this process? What types of stresses are good for bone that actually activate these bone building cells? So there's a long list here of just exercises. So I'm not saying which ones are good or bad yet for bone health, but these are all probably ones that you're familiar with. And there's many others that we could list. So just, in the chat right now, I want everyone just to looking at this list, start listing some of the ones that you believe or that you've heard are good for strengthening bone, right? For example, like who has heard that walking is an effective way to strengthen bone? Most people, I would say, right? I've certainly heard that plenty of times. Weightlifting, how many people have heard weightlifting is good at strengthening bone? So we're actually going to dive in to some of these and look at some of the research behind them. But before we do, let's just look at some of the characteristics of a few of these exercises so that we can start to break this down. So if we look at walking, for example, walking is relatively low impact. That's why it's a very attractive form of exercise. There's numerous benefits to walking. We know it's great cardio exercise. And the amount of force that our body is experiencing in walking is about 1 time our body weight, right? We're just walking around using our body weight. Maybe we're holding some light weights in our hands, and it's relatively safe for most people. Whereas if we compare that to weightlifting, weightlifting can also be low impact. It's very well known for strengthening muscles and soft tissue. Even heavy, if you're doing heavy weightlifting, maybe you're doing 1 to 2 times your body weight. And if done properly with correct form, it's again safe for most people. So you can get a little more force on different tissue in the body weightlifting than you probably would walking. And then if we look at a high impact sport like gymnastics, this is mostly teenagers doing this and young kids, but it's extremely high impact force. Gymnast bodies are incredibly strong because the nature of their sport, it strengthens the entire kinetic chain. They regularly experience 5 to 10 times their body weight and force in different parts of their body. Elite gymnasts like the one on the screen here can even experience up to 17 times their body weight and impact force when they're doing things like this. But obviously, high impact of any type there's a big risk of injury and it damages your joints over time, which is why, not many people are doing gymnastics beyond their teenage years. So let's look at and so those are just some characteristics of 3 different exercises that were on that list. So walking, weightlifting, and gymnastics. And I want you to start thinking about the amount of force that's actually occurring on the body and specifically on the bone. So we know that walking, we're getting about 1 time our body weight on bone. Weightlifting, maybe 1 to 2 times our body weight. High impact sports like gymnastics, 5 times our body weight or more. And so let's look at what some of the research studies have shown on these exercises when they're looking at how does bone density change as a result of doing these activities. So this is a meta-analysis, which means it's combined many studies on the same topic. So this is really a really good analysis of walking in relation to preserving bone density in postmenopausal women. And so I will share the links to all of these studies for anyone who wants to read the study in its entirety. But for the purpose of this webinar, we just want to look at the results and understand some of the key takeaways. So the results of this study looking at postmenopausal women walking and measuring bone density before and after, the meta-analysis showed no significant change in bone mineral density. And so, that's basically to say that when you're walking, while there's lots of benefits to walking, and I would never discourage someone from walking for exercise, however, if someone's just walking thinking that they're going to improve their bone density, they're likely going to be disappointed in the results. So if we look at the next one, we look at weightlifting on bone mineral density, and this is in premenopausal women. And so again, the results of this was a heavy weightlifting program for 12 months. And the results were a relatively small change seen as a result of this program, even for people that are highly motivated to change their bone density. So in other words, this group was, very consistent with working out, lifting heavy, and still saw very little change on average in bone density. And then if we look at gymnastics, so this is a study on gymnasts and bone formation and female adolescents. They had groups of female adolescents doing gymnastics, and then they had control groups not doing gymnastics in the same age range so that they could do a comparison of bone formation in those groups. And for the gymnast, after 12 months follow-up, demonstrated a higher bone mineral density. Gymnasts had significant bone accrual after 12 months in the upper limbs, lower limbs, and whole body. So basically what this shows is that the participants in gymnastics were gaining significantly more bone density in their whole body as compared to non-gymnasts. And so what can we really take away from that, and how can we explain that? Why? Because the conventional thought is just, I need to do weight-bearing exercise, weight-bearing activity to strengthen bone, right? That's what everyone's heard 100 times. Just do weight-bearing, weight-bearing, weight-bearing. But clearly not all weight-bearing produces the same results when it comes to bone health. And so where is that threshold, and how can we explain that? Like, if walking and weightlifting aren't effective, but high impact is, why is that? And where's the threshold of where you cross over? And that's what these next two studies we're going to look at are going to help explain. So if we look at exercise intensity as it relates to bone density. So this study was done again on premenopausal women, and they broke the group in the 5 different categories of impact force. So the impact force ranges, you can see kind of in the middle of, or towards the bottom of the last paragraph on this page. And so the first group was 0.3 to 1.0 G. Now what that means is 0.3 times your body weight to 1 time your body weight. The second group was 1.1 to 2.4. So, kind of more in that weightlifting category of maybe 1 to 2 times your body weight. The third group was 2.5 times your body weight to 3.8 times your body weight, and then higher impact from there. And they were measuring bone density in the hip to see, okay, based on these levels of loading that someone's getting or impact force, what are the results? And what this found was all the groups that were doing roughly 4 times their body weight or more saw a positive change in bone mineral density in their hip. The groups that were doing less than 4 times their body weight, pretty much every normal weight-bearing exercise you can think of, did not see a change in their bone mineral density in their hip. Looking at a similar study, instead of premenopausal women, on this one actually looking at adolescents, they did the same thing, broke people up into groups, had them do different levels of impact force, trying to determine which group strengthened bone and which one didn't. Very similar results. Anyone who was doing 4.2 times their body weight or more from activities such as jumping, you'd have to jump off of something, elevated, not just like jumping rope, but was positively related to hip bone mineral density whereas the moderate impact, or the ones doing less than 4.2 times their body weight, did not see any significant differences in their bone density. So if we come back to this list, and now we have a good understanding, hopefully, that you need to, if you're trying to strengthen bone density in your hip, for example, we need to be experiencing more than 4 times our body weight. And so the question is, which of these is that even possible? For me, I mean, I'm over 200 pounds. So for me to experience 4 times my body weight, we're talking about 800 pounds, over 800 pounds of force. That's a lot. There's no way I can do that weightlifting or most of the things on here. There are a few that do accomplish it, that where it is feasible, but we'll talk about the problem with those, and then we'll get into what are alternative ways to do this. So gymnastics, right? We already looked at that. Gymnasts, they're crazy in what they do in their sport, extreme amounts of impact, really strengthens bone and muscle tissue in their whole body, but obviously a very taxing sport overall on the body. Plyometrics is essentially jump training. So there's different levels of jump training, like jumping rope, you might be getting, maybe 2 times your body weight. Whereas if you're doing, box jumps and jumping off, landing on your heels, or jumping off tables or something, that could also fall into the plyometrics camp. So it is possible to exceed 4 times your body weight, but it's very unusual, but it's definitely doable. Again, not the safest activity to do. And then elite level powerlifting, if you watch powerlifting like in the Olympics and things, you'll see people lifting crazy amounts of weight, and oftentimes they're actually exploding so aggressively that their feet are coming off the ground and they're landing with the weight. So the combination of the impact plus all the weight they're lifting, you can definitely exceed those thresholds as well. But everything else you see on there, walking, running, swimming, yoga, weightlifting, Pilates, biking, on and on and on, hiking. I love all those activities, all those exercises, and there are lots of benefits to doing them. But the purpose of this webinar is looking at, how do we trigger osteogenesis? How do we strengthen bone? And the science is pretty clear that you need to pass these thresholds. And so I want everyone to understand that those activities do not accomplish that. So this is kind of summarizing part 2 of the problem, which is there's really no good solutions. And when we just look at this picture here on the left-hand side, we have traditional exercise, which we know is relatively safe. Most people can do some form of this, but it's not very effective at strengthening bone. And then you look at the high impact exercises that are very effective at strengthening bone, but no one wants to do those things. They're not very safe. And people get hurt doing them, and there's detriment on your joints and everything else. So the question becomes, how do we combine the best of both worlds here, where we can have something relatively safe and practical that's also very effective at strengthening bone? And that is exactly what a man named Dr. John Jaquish set out to answer. And so that's what we're going to talk about in part 3 here, which is a better way to strengthen bone. So who is Dr. John Jaquish? Well, he began, so Dr. John Jaquish is a PhD in biomedical engineering. His father was actually one of the chief engineer for NASA for the Lunar Lander project, and his mother had osteoporosis. And so he was very motivated to create a non-pharmaceutical approach to help his mother fight her osteoporosis and strengthen her bone. And so through doing all this research and understanding what we just went through, he understood that high impact force was the answer, but that it wasn't safe, especially for his, I believe at the time, 70-year-old mother. And so he wanted to create a set of devices that could replicate that type of force and all the benefits of high impact without the associated risks. And he came up with the term, which is now known as osteogenic loading. There are books written on this on Amazon. You can read about what osteogenic loading is, but this is effectively the technique that is done at OsteoStrong, and we'll go through exactly how this works and how it can load the bones safely to pass the thresholds needed to actually trigger natural bone building. So let's first compare this osteogenic loading to something we might do at the gym, because we've already gone through and established that normal weightlifting isn't that effective. So if we were to look at strengthening our legs at the gym, we might do something like a leg press machine like this. And the characteristics of a leg press machine are it utilizes a full range of motion. We're going to do multiple repetitions, trying to tire out our muscles, and we're moving weight back and forth as we're doing that. And if we're lifting really heavy, maybe we're doing 1 to 2 times our body weight, right? Probably nothing beyond that. Whereas if you look at what a gymnast actually does when they land, which is also in this case, with their legs, they're not going through a full range of motion. They're actually sticking the landing in a very specific joint angle that happens instinctually because it's the strongest position for the lower body. And what's interesting is that that joint angle is about 120 degrees in your knee. So a slight bend in your knee. Imagine you were to just slightly jump and land. That's the position you would naturally land in with a slight knee bend. Or if you were to try to jump as high as you could, you would spring from that position. The reason is your body is 7 times stronger with a slight knee bend than it is at the bottom of a squat, as if you were like sitting in a chair. So there's a 7x difference in strength from your strongest position to your weakest position within your range of motion. And so that's why when we're weightlifting and we're going through that full range of motion, we can only do 1 to 2 times our body weight because we're going through all those weaker points. With osteogenic loading or through a high impact, we're isolating the strongest position only and loading only from there with no movement. And so that's exactly how osteogenic loading works. So in this case, we're not doing maximum reps. We're doing 1 repetition. There's no weight being applied. You're basically braced in this position as if you're pinned between 2 walls. And then you're pushing from this position with your own power to a level that you're comfortable with. And in this position, someone can generate way more force on their bone and muscle tissue than they could ever accomplish with weights, similar to what you'd experience through really high versions of impact. And so we see people on these machines of all ages, all ability levels, some people, start at 1, 2 times their body weight. But most people have no issue building up to surpass 4 times their body weight. We have people even doing up to 15 times their body weight in pressure on their bone and muscle tissue on these types of machines. So this is a very specialized approach, but the beauty of this whole thing is that there's no impact. And so when you remove the impact, you're removing 99% of the detriment that happens and the risk associated with doing a high impact while still getting all of the benefits. And so I'm going to play a short video of Tessie, who's our director of marketing here in Denver, and she's going to demonstrate how this machine works in action. So I'll go ahead and play this.
Okay, the next thing we're going to demonstrate is the actual osteogenic loading session. Now, the particular machine I'm on is called the lower growth trigger. So I'm going to be specifically working the part of this a specific amount of force. So for my setup, my feet are about hip distance. My feet are high enough to where I don't have too much of an angle in my ankles. And then you'll notice the angle in my knees is very similar to the angle that showed when I was landing after impact force. So we're looking for about 120 degrees. When you go through any machine at OsteoStrong, you're always working one-on-one with a coach as well to always ensure proper and safe positioning. So feet are set. I'm going to make sure my hips and shoulders are back and my hands can just hold on below. I'll always do a little test push to kind of warm up my legs and just make sure everything feels okay in the joints. After that, I'll take a deep breath and I'm going to hold my push and keep breathing for at least 5 seconds with the goal of hitting 4.2 times my body weight. Now the machine, I'm logged into my profile, so it already has my body weight logged in and it will calculate that automatically. Here we go. So I'm easing into the intensity, just breathing. Most importantly, always staying comfortable, not feeling any pain or anything like that. The machine will take an average of the highest 5 seconds of force that I have pushed. You can see on the machine here, the pounds I'm pushing is elevating. And on the right, it's showing in real time my multiples of body weight. Shaking is normal. I'm going to ease out slowly as well. And then you can see here, I actually hit 6.6 times my body weight and I pushed 864 pounds, which is definitely more than any squat I've ever done. I don't know about you. And that is the lower growth trigger where I have stimulated for the next 7 to 10 days osteogenesis.
Awesome. Sorry about the audio issue there. Hopefully you were able to hear the majority of that. Now, one thing that I always like to point out is that it's very unusual to attempt to do this and be able to just talk normally. Like normally when someone's doing this, they are giving a lot of effort. Tessie's pretty strong, and I think she didn't push quite to her max, so it might look really easy. But when you actually do it, although it's safe, it is a lot of effort. So when you watch someone do it in our center, it's normal to see some heavy breathing, some grunting. Definitely not just a calm conversation, but hopefully that gives you a general idea. The key takeaways of this technique, again, are that we want to load from our strongest joint angle, where we're 7 times stronger than what we can do through a range of motion, which is more typical what we do like weightlifting through a range of motion. And in doing so, we can safely put more force through our bone than we can any other way. And it's going to give all the benefits of really high impact sports like gymnastics, but without the detriment to our joints and the risk of injury. Let's see if I can, there we go. So, and then so that machine was specific for the lower body. So everything from our waist down. So to strengthen the hips, the femur, our ankles, our knees. And this is really good for joint health as well. But then there's 3 other machines. So a total of 4 machines that are designed to address the entire skeletal system from the top of the neck down. But the technique is similar on each part. For each part of the body, we want to put ourselves in our ideal joint angles where we're strongest and can load the most on the skeleton and muscle tissue safely. And then we're only doing one repetition to maximum effort within someone's comfort level. Again, always working one-on-one with the coach, trying to get all those benefits of high impact by safely loading the body with more force than we do any other way. It is important to point out that we only do this 1 time per week. And the reason for that is because that's actually what produces the best results. There's no need to do this type of loading on the body more than once a week. It's not like doing cardio exercise or weightlifting 3 times a week. This is designed to trigger those osteoblast cells to build new bone. And when you activate that process, again, it's called osteogenesis. When you activate that process remains in effect for at least 7 days each time you do it. And so that's why we're only doing this 1 time per week. And so if we look at the benefits of osteogenic loading in strengthening our skeletal system, these are the things that we see on a regular basis from people participating in this. So, one of the most important ones is we see increases in bone density. And by the way, for most people, if you were to get a bone density scan every single year, you would actually see that gradual decline. So you would see bone density just keep getting worse and worse and worse. So everyone's timeline for increasing bone density is different, but ultimately what we're trying to do is first slow down the rate of loss, then get your bone to stabilize so you're no longer losing, and then eventually start increasing. Now, in addition to increasing bone density, this increases muscular strength as well. And so this is kind of the inverse of what we were showing earlier of what happens naturally with aging as you lose bone density. You flip all the arrows around, and when you start to re-strengthen and recondition the body from the inside out, this is what can happen. So you increase muscular strength, that causes balance and posture to improve. Again, a lot of people's posture gets worse over time. Some of it's because of habits like sitting at a desk all day, but some of it's also because their spine has gotten weak and they can't hold themselves up straight anymore. This can also help. This is going to strengthen all the support tissue around joints, which can help joints function better, often decrease joint pain. There's been studies that show this reduces blood glucose, which is great for overall health. And then obviously a really big one again is if we have better bone density, better strength, better balance, we're gonna have less chance of falling and less chance of injury. And all of this can be achieved with doing one session per week consistently. So now that we've kind of gone over what osteogenic loading is, let's look at some of the research behind this. So the first couple things are, there's kind of two camps of research. There's research that supports the concept of osteogenic loading, and then there's research of actually doing studies with these machines. So we're going to look at both. So just to recap on ones we've already looked at, the supporting research is the research that shows if you're doing less than a certain amount of force, you're not going to strengthen bone density. If you're doing more than a certain amount of force, you likely are going to strengthen bone density. And so that's, again, the studies on premenopausal women showed roughly 4 times your body weight or more is that threshold. And again, this study, again, 4.2 times your body weight or more was the threshold found in this study. So very, very similar results there. And then if we look at a study that was done on osteogenic loading, when this study was done, they did pre-screen the participants to show what was possible for postmenopausal women if they had no other underlying health issues. So, we see a lot of different scenarios with people, doing OsteoStrong, and, whether it's, someone who's had cancer recently and has undergone chemotherapy, that has extreme detriment to your bone density, or someone who has thyroid health issues, that also has detriment to bone density. So there's a lot of factors that can cause your body to lose bone, but for purposes of a scientific study, they pre-screen people to make sure, okay, we don't have anyone who's, currently going through, cancer treatment, or doesn't have thyroid issues, or doesn't have vitamin D deficiency. So we can actually see if someone who's in otherwise good health, what is possible. And so this was about a 6-month study on postmenopausal women, and these women saw phenomenal results. They saw an increase of 14.9% in their hip and 16.6% in their spine. Now, those are definitely better than the average results we see. However, that is what is possible if someone really takes care of, all the other aspects of their health. I'll actually show you in a second some of the results we see here locally. So these are anonymous results from some of our members. I don't have any males included on this screenshot. We have plenty of men doing this with good success as well. But this is just a snapshot of some of the results we've seen of women, all postmenopausal. You can see the number of sessions they've completed and the change in their hip specifically. So those are just some of the results. Again, everyone's timeline is different. But again, everyone's kind of going through that same progression of those three goals. First thing is slowing down bone loss. Second thing is getting bone loss to stabilize so that you're no longer losing bone. And then the third thing is actually starting to increase. Most people, if they just reach stabilization, would probably never have and were able to maintain that, would probably never have an issue. But it's obviously always exciting to see people increase as well. Here's similar, and so instead of looking at the hip, this is now looking at the spine. So this increases bone density in the spine as well. So again, you can see I chose just postmenopausal women for these screenshots. But again, we have people of all ages doing this, men and women. But you can see their ages, number of sessions, and the change in bone mineral density in their spine. So then if we look at, some of the other benefits to this, so this technology was developed specifically for bone density, but then they quickly found that there's other health benefits to doing osteogenic loading. One of the biggest ones that's a huge problem in our society is blood glucose levels. So if you look at the number of people in the US that are either pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, it's really alarming. I forget the statistics offhand, but I want to say it's like 1 out of 3 people is either pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic. And you determine that by doing a hemoglobin A1C test. So pretty much any doctor can do that for you. It's a really important health marker to look at. Someone who is pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic has a higher risk for pretty much every other chronic disease, whether it's, cancer, stroke, heart disease, autoimmune issues, you name it. So they did a 6 months trial of people doing osteogenic loading, looking at their blood glucose levels. And the mechanism for how OsteoStrong helps with this is when you put this much force through the body safely, it actually doesn't only strengthen bone, it strengthens and increases the density of muscle tissue. So it's not necessarily going to increase the size of muscles, but it increases the density of muscles. And when you make your muscles have more density, they utilize more blood glucose, which is your body's fuel, and that helps lower someone's overall blood glucose levels, which just effectively makes you a healthier individual. And so in looking at, for those of you that are familiar with A1C levels, if you've had this test before, the average result was from a 6.37 to a 5.81. That's basically a half a point difference, which is phenomenal. To try to do that otherwise is very difficult. And this was all done, this study was done without any changes in lifestyle or diet. For anyone who's very serious about their A1C, in addition to doing OsteoStrong, it always helps to stack other lifestyle changes on top of it. So lots of things you can do there, but that would be a discussion for another webinar. And so if we talk just a little bit about a little bit deeper about how does this work and what's going on. Our bone is designed to flex and bend, and it looks a little scary to watch on a screen like this. But bone is actually designed to be really flexible. So the inner architecture of bone is made primarily of collagen, and that's meant to allow our bone to absorb shock, just like you're watching those gymnasts land. If bones were just rigid, they would break very easily. And so when you put this compressive force on bone, either through osteogenic loading or through really high impact sports like gymnastics, that's actually what triggers that osteogenesis, the natural bone building that we talked about. So I'm going to pause there. Hopefully that was clear and gave everyone some good information. I want to answer some questions, and then for anyone who's a guest on here, I want to tell you how, if you're interested in learning more about OsteoStrong and getting started with a complimentary consultation, how you can do that. We're also going to have a special offer for anyone new who's joining this webinar. So if you have questions, just pop it in the Q&A, and I'll let Tessie read the questions, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, we have one question that came in from Joanne, which was asking any information on how much horseback riding might have benefit on bone building.
Horseback riding. Well, that's an interesting question. So, there's definitely some, I'm not an equestrian. There's definitely some impact from riding a horse. But again, the type of force we're trying to put on bone is compressive force. So think squeezing the bone end to end, which is what happens when we land through impact or when we're doing osteogenic loading. The most impact through horse riding, I would assume, would actually happen when accidents occur and someone actually gets bucked off a horse. Same thing with like a car accident. Like your body can experience extreme amounts of force if you fall off a horse or get in a car accident or something like that. But it's not necessarily something you want to do intentionally.
Another question that came in was definitely a question we get a lot, which is how long before my DEXA result might show a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. So we recommend 1.5 years between DEXA scans. Now, for most of the time, if you're getting them through your doctor, they actually wait 2 years. So if you're doing like a pharmaceutical treatment, they'll usually wait 2 years between scans to see a difference. It is possible to see something in a shorter timeline than that, but that's usually 1.5 years to 2 years is what we typically recommend.
1.5 to 2 years. We had another question that I sort of answered in the chat, but someone did ask, what if your foot, maybe you have a little injury or something, can you still do these machines, or how does that work? And someone, she just elaborated, I have bad knees and my foot is fussy. Is this for me? I also have scoliosis.
Great question. So, it depends on the circumstances, but most of the time, if it's just related to joint pain, it's not like a recent injury where someone's like has a broken ankle or something. Basically, if you're cleared for weight bearing exercise, you can likely do this. Now, most people that have joint issues, like say knee pain or shoulder pain, and if they do a normal weightlifting workout, usually that will aggravate that joint and sometimes make it worse. And a lot of that is because you're doing things through a range of motion and you're putting joints and angles where they're compromised. Through OsteoStrong, in most cases, what we've seen is with people that have knee or shoulder issues are able to do this, and it not only doesn't bother them while they're doing it, it actually helps improve your joint pain over time and strengthen that joint. So that would, and then in terms of foot pain and things like that, the other piece to keep in mind with this is you're being put in very specific positions, but you're in full control the entire time on every single session, meaning you determine how hard you push on any given machine. And you always have a coach standing right there with you, monitoring your form, coaching you through it. And so if someone has an issue, we recommend just starting slow and letting your body, let your body see how it responds. And then if everything feels okay, you can progress from there, but you can go at your own pace and do what you're comfortable with. So I would say more often than not, people, even with lots of bodily injuries or issues and aches and pains, are able to participate.
Yeah, great answer with that one. We have another question from Robin who asks, when do you start to notice an improvement on balance?
Great question. So balance, so we try to measure and quantify as much as we can in terms of where someone starts and how they improve. Balance is actually one of the first things that we see improvement on, even within a couple months of doing OsteoStrong. So we do a balance assessment in the beginning when someone starts, and then we reevaluate that after a few months, and then we test periodically from there. But we've seen one of my favorite stories is I'll never forget this woman, Rosemary, actually lived when we opened our first center in Lakewood, Colorado. She was coming all the way from Boulder with her friends. She was that committed to drive all the way down each week, and she was coming for her bone health and her bone density. And about a month or two in, she's been doing Pilates, I think, for 10 years, consistently twice a week. And anytime they would do some balance exercises, she was always a little embarrassed because she couldn't really stand on one foot very well. And like after 2 months of doing OsteoStrong, all of a sudden, like she could balance better than she could for the previous 10 years. And she pulled me aside and she's like, Greg, I have to ask, I can't figure out anything else I've done differently. Does OsteoStrong help with balance? And I just like laughed because I was like, well, Rosemary, clearly I didn't do a very good job of teaching you and educating you at the beginning when you started with us. But yes, one of the main benefits of doing this, especially early on, is improvements in balance. And so she was thrilled. And I think we have a video somewhere on our social media of her demonstrating that.
That is so great. I actually haven't heard that story. She's like, am I crazy or is this helping my balance?
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. You guys are asking amazing questions, y'all. We have another one here that says, if you're doing OsteoStrong, do you recommend that folks not do certain other types of exercises? So what should my exercise look like outside of OsteoStrong?
Great question. So again, OsteoStrong is not necessarily designed to be a replacement for anything. It's an add-on. So this is addressing a different part of health, a different part of the body. And we're trying to strengthen the body, starting with our skeletal system and strengthening the body from the inside out. And there are a lot of benefits. With that being said, there's a lot of other benefits to other forms of exercise. So for example, doing cardiovascular exercise is really important for heart health. Doing some type of walking, swimming, biking, whatever your preferred version of cardio is always great. Doing an additional strength training is great. So if you want to do Pilates or yoga or weightlifting, or Tai Chi, whatever it is, with OsteoStrong, this is something you're only doing once a week. And then so there's plenty of other opportunity to do other exercise. Do we have people that the only form of exercise they do is OsteoStrong? Absolutely. And if that's all you're interested in, that's totally fine. But we encourage people to try other forms of exercise for other parts of their health as well.
Awesome. Let's see. Someone did ask a review of what are they said 3 machines. It's actually 4 machines. So what is each machine targeting? What area?
Yeah, great question. So the 4 machines, so the one that we showed the video of is, we call it the lower growth trigger. It's helping trigger bone density improvements and muscle strength in our lower body. So everything from the waist down. The second machine is for the upper body, so upper extremities, starting from the chest cavity all the way through the wrists. The third machine is for our core and rib cage. And then the last machine is for our back and spine. When you put the 4 together, you're addressing everything from the top of your neck down.
Great. And sorry, I'm still reading one of the other questions. One person did mention they have a prosthetic, which I know we do have members who've had like a full knee replacement or hip replacement. Anything you would speak into if someone has a prosthetic, Greg?
Yeah, I think if someone, my father's not around anymore, but I often think of him because he had a stroke and like his left arm was paralyzed, limited mobility in his left leg, and so I always think about like how he might do this, and so I think if someone has a full prosthetic, some similar concepts might apply. But basically, you could do some of the machines either with just one arm or just one leg, or you could have, like, if someone has a prosthetic leg, they could still use the machines. The important thing is we try to encourage everyone to do their best to push evenly through both feet, and so we don't want to overcompensate with one side. So we'd probably have someone either push with just one leg if they had a prosthetic leg, or if they were pushing with both, we would try to put equal pressure through all the way up through both hips rather than just pushing really hard with one side.
That makes sense. So trying to push evenly through both sides. So this question is from Connie, and it says, I'm also on a prescription for osteoporosis. How do I distinguish which one is working? Are they complementary? What if I'm already doing a pharmaceutical, or should I do both?
Yeah, the pharmaceuticals are always a conversation between you and your doctor. There's different types of pharmaceuticals out there. So there's pharmaceuticals that are designed to increase bone building activity, which is what OsteoStrong is designed to do naturally. So some of those drugs would be like a Forteo or a Tymlos. Those are in the bone anabolic category, again, increasing bone building. I would say the more popular pharmaceuticals are the bisphosphonate drugs, like a Fosamax, for example, is a really popular one, but there's a lot of them. And those are designed to slow down the bone removal. And so older bone is staying intact longer. But either way, the goal of both is to increase bone density. Now, we have plenty of people that are doing OsteoStrong with pharmaceuticals, both types of pharmaceuticals. We have plenty of people doing OsteoStrong without any pharmaceuticals. So it's really up to each person to have that conversation with their doctor, weigh the benefits and risks of each piece of the equation that you're putting into your plan, and coming up with whatever plan you feel is good. But in terms of the first part of the question, I think of it like, if you're after a result and you're doing a really good nutrition plan, a really good supplement plan, maybe you're doing OsteoStrong and you're doing pharmaceuticals, and then 2 years later, you get the result you're after. I think, I wouldn't worry so much about like, well, the pharmaceuticals are responsible for 60% of the result, or 40% of the result, or 20% of the result, or none of the result. In terms of howing, what did what, but I believe that, most of these things are synergistic. So, for example, with OsteoStrong, that's basically the stimulus on your body to trigger your body to build bone. But how well someone's body is primed to build bone, which is really going to come from other aspects of your health, like your nutrition, your micronutrient levels, certain hormone levels like vitamin D and thyroid health. Those are going to have a big determining factor, as well as someone's genetics, a determining factor in your results as well. So we know that those pieces are very synergistic and equally important with each other.
Makes sense. I think that is all the questions we have now. One person is saying, Doctor, inform me, she has had really good results from her patients doing OsteoStrong. Oh, that's awesome. Great. Cool. Shall we wrap up here and we'll do the giveaways?
Yeah, of course. Do you want to go ahead and do the giveaways now?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so you guys can open up the chat, and this way down below where you're chatting to maybe hosts and panelists, you can also now select everyone. and let me know who's ready for a giveaway. Yay. Okay, so I have, yay, Lisa says, I am me. Awesome. Okay, so I have put everyone who joined live, because we did say you must be present to win, in a little wheel spinning. And I know a few people hopped off, so a little wheel spinner, and we are going to select a giveaway. So the first prize is going to be from Club Pilates. So if you are in the Denver area, we do have Club Pilates in Belmar, the Lakewood area.